Oh, Jesus fucking Christ!
It could be said that Dry Blood is the memento of horror movies. So Dry Blood, this one is directed by Kelton Jones, who actually has a role in the movie as well as the sheriff character. And there's also written by Clint Carney, who is actually the lead actor in the movie of the character of Brian. Now when you first watch this, the movie seems like it'll be relatively straightforward. So Brian is a drug addict, he wants to try and kick the habit. So he decides he's going to try and get to this kind of cabin in the woods that he owned with his ex-wife to try and kind of get himself out the temptation of taking drugs. So he's there and he's trying to enlist the help of his friend Anne, who is this kind of an ex-lover we kind of led to believe, to try and kind of help him kick the habit. And while he's there, he's sort of seeing kind of strange kind of hallucinations, but he's putting it down to the fact that he's got sort of drug withdrawal symptoms and stuff like that. So all what he's seeing, he assumes is what his mind. But we see some horrific kind of imagery here. So when he turns up and just kind of trying to kind of help him, and he's kind of saying it, he's seeing these hallucinations. He's being hassled by this local sheriff played by Kelton Jones, who seems to have an unhealthy interest in him. So ultimately it's a kind of a story of these three characters, and as the movie progresses, kind of like an onion, more kind of layers are kind of peeled off, and it all gets a little bit trippy as the movie progresses into its kind of third act. So let's talk about Dry Blood. So what works with this movie first of all? One thing is an absolute standout of this movie, and considering it's a low-budget indie movie, there are some incredible effects here. The effects people should be proud, because this movie has some truly disturbing imagery in it. I mean, I won't spoil what happens in regards to some of the stuff you'll see here, but the gore you'll see and the sort of supernatural effects are very, very, very effective. Now they are kind of saved up for the latter half of the movie, so when you're watching this initially, you'll go into think, what's he talking about? There's nothing here. But trust me, it'll come. Very, very well done effects. The second big thing I would say is the idea behind this movie, and I guess to a degree the writing, because this movie is far more complex than it lets on. Now I'm going to try and kind of go through this without any spoilers here, but when you're watching the movie, you initially think, I don't really understand what's happening here. But when you give it some thoughts, let me just say that things may not happen in the order that you think, and some things may well be flashbacks. The very disturbing imagery that you'll see, it could be a hallucination, it could be real kind of ghosts that are kind of haunting Brian, or it could be something else entirely. We'll have to watch the movie to find out. But as I say, it's a very kind of like a memento. There's a kind of a hint really about what's kind of going on, but things may not be quite as they seem. And as things are kind of told in a kind of non-linear fashion, basically, we see kind of flashbacks, flash forwards in different kind of time frames, and things may kind of make sense as you kind of watch the film. This is one of those films which is relatively hard to talk about, really, because it's there's obviously things that are revealed, and I don't want to spoil them for you. But suffice to say that the idea here is very smart. It's very kind of a movie where you have to kind of pay attention to kind of really kind of get what's happening in the plot and realise that things are happening in kind of different sort of time frames and maybe a little bit sort of jumbled up. But if you kind of think about it towards the end, it will kind of make sense. However, I think if you're kind of just watching this as a kind of not really paying attention, people may get confused. Now, let's talk about the negatives of this movie. For me, although I think the idea is very, very good, I don't know if the execution is that well done. So I really appreciated the complex plot here, and it is a complex plot, although it kind of fools you into thinking that it isn't. But I don't know if it was done. I feel it would be confusing for some people. So I don't know if the execution of this movie was done in such an effective way, if that makes sense. Again, hard to kind of talk about without kind of really spoiling everything for you. But yeah, good idea, but maybe not executed as well as it could have been. Coupled with that, I feel there are some not great acting choices, I have to say. The most egregious of which is our female character, Annie, who looks like she's wearing a dodgy wig for some reason the whole movie, but I didn't think her acting was particularly strong. Same with Clint Carney as well. I didn't feel his acting was all that fantastic, to be honest with you. Maybe not terrible, but you know, on the weaker side. And I've got to say, the first kind of hour of this movie is a little slow, to the point where a slow burn is one thing, but this movie is just unnecessarily slow in some scenes. We'll have scenes, for example, where we see people buying groceries and we'll see the whole transaction and stuff like that. There's just, I feel the first hour needed to be edited down by about 10 to 15 minutes really. I think it just ends up dragging in places. Now when we get to that last act, it's all changed then, kind of things will kind of happen at almost a kind of a breakneck speed, but I almost feel the shifting gears is a little bit too, too sudden. So it kind of goes from being very, very slow to kind of like quite a lot happening in a kind of a short space of time. So I feel maybe the pacing could have just been evened out just a tad to kind of like maybe kind of catch some viewers up to speed. But that said, I do think this movie, if you can kind of look below the surface and maybe understand what's going on, there is a lot to enjoy here. And like I've said, I feel like this movie has a kind of a cerebral sense to it. I just don't feel it hasn't got the kind of the experience behind to make it truly transition onto screen as well as maybe I think the filmmakers would have intended. But like I've said, if you want a kind of a bit more of a cerebral horror, a psychological horror, it definitely is psychological horror with some pretty kind of graphic horror visuals as well that I think are very, very effective, then you can do a lot worse with this movie. I actually thought this movie, although I don't think it's got a lot of rewatchability factor to it, I did enjoy the movie and I appreciated having a kind of somewhat of a kind of clever script and a kind of an idea here that I feel is somewhat of a kind of maybe not unique but a clever way of presenting a horror film like this. Like I said, there are some issues with it. I try to avoid kind of what am I going to give this one? I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I'm toing and throwing between a 6 and a 7. We'll go with a 7 because I do feel there's some talent here. I do feel it's let down by some inexperience, perhaps, in regards to some of the acting and just the storytelling in general. But there is a lot to enjoy. And like I've said, if you want some well done kind of horror effects, then check this one out. So 7 out of 10 for me. Have you seen this? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.